Hello again, and welcome to a financial thought leadership podcast, Banking on Experience, sponsored by CRMNEXT, the banking CRM, where we simplify work, drive growth, and deliver on experience. This podcast is meant to empower individuals working in the financial industry with stories, experiences, and knowledge straight from the source. Please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, and stay tuned for an awesome show. Welcome to another episode of Banking on Experience. I'm your host, James Gilbert, joined by Brian Geary today. Brian is the president of Linear Financial Technologies. That's the market leader in digital account origination technology and insights for financial institutions. Today, we're going to be talking about how financial institutions can manage lending more efficiently. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks, James, and excited to be here.
I always like to start off the podcast just by asking kind of a random question so people can get to know who you are as a person. What's your perfect day outside of work look like?
Yeah, it's probably spending time with my family. I've got a couple kids, so probably hanging with them and just kind of being outside.
It's always a treat. I got 4 kids myself, and you just never know what's going to happen in a single day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let's get the topic. Let's start with, how can financial institutions today help revive the SMB economy through lending?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple thoughts here. One is, access to capital for small businesses is always one of the biggest pain points that they have. Capital is really the fuel that drives the SMB economy. As we've kind of seen through the recent, pandemic. Being a small business owner is, can be treacherous at times. It's risky, and depending on the industry, there's all these kind of external kind of impacts that can be happening. So I think that's one of the key things that we are obviously helping with our company. We're really helping our clients to digitize and streamline the experience, use different types of data, so that they can be providing that access to capital that is so kind of pivotal to the SMB economy.
What's so fascinating to me is right now, especially in the financial world, there's a focus on financial inclusion. But the hard part about all of that, when it comes to anything that encompasses financial inclusion at all, is having access to the data so it's organized and being able to leverage that data in an efficient way. How do you think that the work from home environment has changed that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Work from home, it's had some impacts, obviously, on like what we're doing or in the small business economy. If you just use the example, like, I live outside of New York City, and if you go into Midtown Manhattan today, lunch restaurants that were kind of thriving off of the office crowd that came in every day, is no longer there. And so a lot of businesses have had to kind of adapt their business model to be able to survive. So that's one kind of small example. And I think you were just mentioning also just data in general, which hopefully we can kind of get into in this conversation. Which I think there's some interesting things that we're doing to kind of help our clients to leverage data in different ways, so they can be saying yes more to these clients that are needing this kind of access to capital.
Love it. What is, in your mind, the biggest challenge that financial institutions face, especially with lending? Like, what are the 1 to 2 things that you think they can do today to address it?
Yeah, I think there's 2 thoughts. One is just kind of push toward kind of meeting customers where they want to be and having a digital experience for clients. Historically, if you're a small business owner and you were looking for a working capital loan or something to fund your business, you're typically kind of going into a branch, meeting with a banker. They'll hand you a paper application, which you're then taking home, filling out, pulling 3 to 10 different documents, and then bringing that back in to submit it. And then from there, the process is relatively manual, or historically has been manual, and it could take you anywhere from a week to 2 months, depending on the complexity and type of loan you're applying for, to actually get your capital. That's really what we are trying to kind of drive here with Linear, is embracing both kind of the digital experience for customers. You can apply online. Business owners are always time strapped, and so they need to be able to have that flexibility to be able to apply at kind of peak hours during the middle of the day. And then also just kind of embracing automation so that everything, that the steps once you actually submit your application are not all manual as well. There's tons of third-party data sources that we're helping our clients to leverage to be able to automate some of the or most of the steps in the credit process and the fraud process and the know your customer process, just to be able to cut down on the manual steps that occur and then that time for that business owner to get that decision. So now you have that access to that kind of digital application, and then you can be getting an answer back as fast as instantly, so that you know kind of where you stand without having to wait that longer period of time.
I am all for automation. And we
Yeah.
actually, it's funny that this is such a great topic for me personally right now because like the Utah housing market is bananas right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's insane, right? So everybody's selling their house, trying to get all the equity they can out of the house, but then equally it's like impossible to find a home and the homes are way expensive. But everyone now, like if you're gonna sell your house or purchase a new one, you have to explore a jumbo loan. And this is the first time in my life that I've ever experienced it. And going through the process of like just getting documents to people and the massive amount of information that we have to send as consumers to somebody who's going to loan us and lends to us. And it's fascinating to me how much data exists out there about each one of us and how we are the consumers have to go find it and give it to them.
There's a ton of analogy between the mortgage process and what occurs on the small business side. In some ways, like small business loans are much bigger than your typical consumer credit card or something that's like a much smaller dollar amount. And so the process in some ways is very similar. You're asked to supply lots of documentation, your financial statements, your tax returns, resume, like things like that. And then it goes into this queue that an underwriter has to basically go and parse through all of that data to look at it. And the data sources on the small business side are not perfect, but there are a lot of interesting data sources. Like the one thing that we found is super interesting is looking at the data that kind of comes through your small business checking account. You get a sense of how that customer is managing the cash flow. You get a sense of like, are they overdrafting? And you also get a sense of like what the revenue is of that business. Because if you have one central account, you're seeing all the kind of inflows into that, which you can use as a kind of a proxy for revenue. So you can make a lot of almost like instant kind of decisions and predictive kind of analysis on that customer without having to go and like dig through a financial statement that's going to take an underwriter a day or two to like work through.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, dude. You had mentioned something in our previous conversation that I wanted to bring up as well. I really love the concept that you mentioned here, and I'd like for you to kind of explain what it means to you. And that's the open banking revolution. I love for our listeners to know a little more about that.
Sure. Yeah, I think of open banking. I think that if you boil it down to what it kind of means is you have products. Let's just use an example, like checking accounts at a bank. It's essentially the concept is like who has access to the data that lies within that. And so if you as a consumer essentially own that data, you can use that and kind of port it to or export it to different other providers. So I'll just give you like a very concrete example. Something that we typically do in our application process. A small business customer comes in, they're applying for a loan. We ask them for, hey, we want to actually understand, like as I was mentioning a second ago, the data that's flowing through your small business checking account. There are providers out there today that you can put your user ID and password in for that account, and we can go and basically pull it into our application, run automated models on it, and make a decision. And so that I think of open banking as really the ability to the customer to direct where the data kind of flows from the products that they kind of have with FIs today.
It's so
And so,
fast.
oh god, yeah.
I love it. I mean, I very rarely, if I think I've only done this maybe 3 times in our entire existence of the podcast, but we actually solved for that at CRMNEXT, becoming sort of this data hub that allows integrations into things like the core and making sure that you're pulling data and being able to push data two-way is a big key to a lot of that. Being able to manage that and orchestrate it in a way where the data is also clean and and validated, right? And it's so fascinating to me how many people don't realize that a lot of times it starts there. You've got to have your data organized in a way that you can actually leverage it.
Yeah. I mean, we've bumped into that a number of times with integrations with our FI clients. It's easier to pull data kind of out of the core, but putting it back in, like the two-way of actually sending it back in and having it be kind of clean and not break the data that's in there today, that is a much trickier kind of concept.
No doubt about it. Well, let's talk a little bit about more on the data side. How do you feel like AI plays a role in this, and in general, playing and making the lending process more efficient?
Listen, as we were mentioning, there are a number of third-party data sources that we typically leverage to help automate the processes to approve a customer and to originate a loan or a checking account. We're kind of using that data to automate a credit decision. Some of it exists out there today with things like credit bureaus, but then there's additional kind of alternative sources that we're talking about with bank statement data. You can do the same thing with fraud. And as FIs are moving toward a digital experience for customers, the thing that scares the heck out of them is fraud. And so what we've really kind of built is this process that leverages these third-party sources. You can automate a number of those steps to really get comfortable with that who the customer is that you are about to lend to, and then you can always augment that with a manual process. So that's the kind of the key one is data. What we've seen is you can build algorithms on top of the data so that you can automate those decisions. So you're pulling data in for a credit score, you build an algorithm, and out pops kind of at the end of that, kind of a rank ordered score of like how risky this customer is and should you be lending to them. And then where AI comes in on top of that is, really what AI is the ability for these algorithms to learn and essentially kind of make themselves better over time. And so, that is a concept, especially for credit decisions, because they're kind of highly regulated, that I think FIs are still getting comfortable with, but it's gaining more and more traction.
No doubt.
We use AI and machine learning in the generation of those credit models, so that we're kind of thinking through all the iterations of what could be the most predictive. And then where we actually have a new application, and others do, as well, is in the fraud arena, where we are actually in the process right now of launching a product that we call Linear Defense, which is like a truly AI-based fraud score. That is, it is this whole concept that I was just mentioning, where the algorithm is learning based on the amount of data that's flowing through it, making itself smarter. And it's getting very predictive into, trying to find that needle in a haystack of a fraudulent actor that may be coming in to, kind of steal the money versus use it for actual working capital for their business.
Very cool. I like that. I've talked to a few credit unions specifically, actually, this year, where when you mentioned this idea of AI, it actually reminds me of some of these conversations that I was having. And some of them were around this concept of like, like when you go get a new car loan, you don't always like think to yourself, I'm going to go get it through this financial institution. You just kind of let the dealer do its own thing, right?
Yep.
Well, it's a lot of this concept that I think more and more financial institutions need to get in the habit of doing, which is in a lot of ways, you actually can tap into a lot of that data already.
Right. They have these FIs and banks, they have so much data on their customers today.
It's true. And they know, and the funny thing is they know, like if I have applied for a loan and I'm in a pre-approval process, maybe it's for a mortgage, maybe it's for an auto loan. If you have a better rate as an institution, why would you not like proactively reach out to that person and be like, hey, I know you might have got pre-approved. How far along are you in the process? Because we can beat it. Like,
right.
That's the world that we all want to live in. Am I right? I mean, then we're actually delivering on the experience that people really care about and making it convenient for them, not the other way around, where we're making it convenient for people who are doing the lending.
Right.
So,
right.
I think that I love the idea of AI and using data there. I also want to weave in another question here, which is around technology. What role does technology, in your mind, play in all of this?
Yeah, technology is the core, really, of the ability to solve these pain points that we've been talking about, which are digitizing the experience, of automating it, of leveraging third-party data sources, of running things like AI or machine learning models. And that's really the kind of the core of our business model at Linear, is we're providing this kind of cloud-based SaaS technology platform that allows you to kind of host all of the aspects across that entire journey. And so that's that's the key to all of this, is having the technology platform to be able to run most of these processes. And then you're kind of moving away from, again, like the historical model is there's a lot of human kind of involvement, but doing a lot of like lower value tasks like keying in data or shuffling papers. And so you basically move the human involvement to the very high value tasks of making the judgmental decisions that the machine may not be able to do. So I think that's the key to making the kind of the process the most efficient here going forward.
Financial institutions historically are trying to compete with fintech companies. That's a lot of times what happens. A good example of this is I like to think about like some of the big brands that do personal loans, right?
Yeah.
How does the fintech world play in this? Because I know like community banks and credit unions specifically that we've talked to, that the struggle on identifying, hey, like we know somebody's looking for a personal loan, they're going to go to one of these fintech providers. We want to at least be part of the game. And I think we explained a little bit of an example of how you can do that with the dealer stuff, right? But fintech companies are part of this ecosystem. So talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah. This is how I think this space has evolved. I mean, initially it was, if you wanted a small business loan, you go to a bank. Then starting in 2010 or maybe a little bit earlier, this kind of fintech, direct to consumer, direct to small business fintech kind of provider popped up. In the small business space, how that has evolved is typically if you are slightly riskier customer, willing to pay a higher rate for a product, but you get a really fast and kind of digital customer experience, then you would kind of opt for the fintech route. And if you wanted the lowest rate possible, or you had a relationship with your bank that you wanted to leverage, then you would still go the bank route. And I think what we are trying to basically kind of help the FI community do is offer that exact same like fintech customer experience, where you can do digitally, you can get a very fast decision. They're using more data to be able to kind of say yes to more customers, but you're using all the like inherent advantages of the bank still, or the FI still, which is they have low cost of funds, so they can give you a low price. They have bankers and RMs that can kind of help you through the process, and they're just like, because they're kind of plugged into the regulatory regime, like they understand how to be kind of like compliant with those things. So it's kind of like what we're trying to do is like leverage the benefits or the inherent advantages that the FI credit union banking community has, but layer on this like kind of great digital experience so that they can be really kind of competing and winning back some of that share of customers that they may have been losing over the last 10 years.
Love it. Experience matters. Experience really matters.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about years of experience. We're talking about like the experience people have,
like the customer experience.
Yeah. The human connection that happens at every moment, making it as seamless as possible. We all know the brand Amazon does it better than anyone. We are trying to replicate that. And we have to try to figure it out because people expect the same type of seamless experience that Amazon provides in every interaction that they have with every single brand.
Yeah, exactly. And the pandemic has only inflated that expectation as well.
100%.
It's for a period of time, branches were closed. People were kind of mass adopting the like digital banking products. Like, okay, I'm actually gonna sign up for my online banking and deposit checks and do things that I probably hadn't done, before. And so now that they're experiencing that on the consumer side, they want that on the business side as well.
Love it. Brian, we're almost at time, but I have one more question for you. If you could change the world with one thing that you did, or one thing you think that the world should do, what would it be?
Yeah, as I was prepping for this conversation, it actually is, I think, similar to what you were kind of mentioning, earlier in the conversation. Kind of our vision for I think where this is going is, like, what we want to be able to provide, or we want like FIs to be able to provide, is that like always on. We think of the term like always on capital, so that you can be leveraging data ahead of someone actually say, like, raising their hand or walking into a branch and saying, I'd like to apply for this. So think about a use case where you log into your online banking portal, you're a consumer or a small business customer, and there's always like a box in the top right that says, hey, you've got, we've been running this algorithm based on your data, and you've got $50,000 ready to borrow at a moment's notice. Just click the button and kind of proceed. So that, that kind of takes out a lot of the friction that has existed over the years, and allows you that, like, kind of like, hey, we know you as a customer, we have this offering for you, and it's so seamless and digital that you can basically click the button, one click, and we'll fund it to you. So I think that would be the kind of utopia of where we're heading in the small business lending market.
Love it. Brian, where can our listeners reach you? And, give a high level linear view as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So our website is linearft.com. We've got some good content on there, and happy to you can obviously reach out to us through there and set up a demo. And then again, the company, what we are providing is this kind of digital origination platform, focused on the SMB space, mostly FIs, and we are also kind of branching into the kind of embedded finance world as well.
Love it. Brian, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast. Awesome insights, and looking forward to having you again maybe sometime.